In the blistering summer of 1996, I found myself stationed at a remote fire lookout tower nestled amidst an unending sea of trees. The solitude was a welcome change, a chance to escape the bustling noise of everyday life. The tower stood as a lone sentinel, keeping watch over the forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The days were peaceful, marked only by the rhythmic cadence of nature going about its business. But as the days turned into weeks, the tranquility began to morph into something far more sinister. It started subtly, a whisper of unease carried by the wind, a flicker of shadows that darted just at the edge of vision. The forest, once a haven of peace, seemed to harbor secrets that were slowly unraveling, revealing a darkness that lay hidden in its depths. The first incident occurred on a morning shrouded in fog, a thick blanket that swallowed the trees and muted the world. I was sipping my coffee, the warmth a stark contrast to the cold tendrils of fog that seeped through the cracks. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, its form obscured by the mist. It stood motionless, a dark silhouette against the gray canvas. I reached for my binoculars, but when I looked again, the figure had vanished, swallowed by the fog. Days turned into nights, and the feeling of being watched grew, a constant pressure at the back of my mind. The forest seemed to watch, its trees bearing silent witness to the unfolding events. It was during one of those restless nights that I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping on the window. My heart raced, each tap echoing like a drumbeat in the silence of the night. I mustered the courage to pull back the curtain, but there was nothing there, just the darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely. Morning brought no respite, as I discovered footprints outside the tower, a set of prints that led up to the window and then disappeared abruptly, as if the visitor had vanished into thin air. The authorities dismissed it as a prank, but I knew better. The footprints were too distinct, too human to be a mere animal. And the fear was all too real, a tangible entity that seemed to grow with each passing day. As the days went by, the incidents escalated. Objects inside the tower moved of their own accord, shifting places and creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Strange markings appeared on the windows, cryptic symbols that seemed to hold a message, a warning perhaps. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that echoed through the trees, speaking in tongues that twisted and turned, forming words that seemed almost familiar, yet remained just out of grasp. The figure returned, its appearances growing more frequent, its form more distinct. It was a man, but his features were a void, an abyss that seemed to absorb the light around it. His eyes were pools of darkness, holding a malice that seemed to seep into my very soul. I could feel his gaze, a piercing scrutiny that held promises of darkness and despair. Nights turned into a symphony of otherworldly sounds, a chorus of whispers and screams that reverberated through the forest. The trees seemed to communicate, their leaves rustling in a language that was ancient and primal. The ground trembled with a rhythm that mirrored the heartbeat of the forest itself, a living entity that breathed and watched with unseen eyes. The isolation began to wear on me, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring. I could feel the forest closing in, its presence a constant weight that pressed down, threatening to crush me under its malevolent gaze. The tower, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in, trapping me with the unseen entity that stalked the shadows. One night, as the moon bathed the world in a pale glow, the entity made its move. The door creaked open, a slow, deliberate sound that shattered the silence. Footsteps approached, each step a declaration of intent, a promise of the darkness that awaited. I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, as the presence loomed over me, its breath cold and fetid, a smell of decay that filled the air. I dared not open my eyes, fear holding me in a vice-like grip. The entity seemed to study me, its presence a swirling vortex of darkness that threatened to engulf me. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity as I waited for the inevitable. But as the first rays of the sun pierced the darkness, the entity retreated, its presence dissipating like mist before the morning sun. I was left shaken, a shell of the person I once was, scarred by the darkness that had touched my soul. As soon as daylight graced the forest, I packed my belongings, my resolve firm. I fled the tower, the forest watching silently as I retreated, its trees bearing witness to my escape. I vowed never to return, to leave the darkness behind, a chapter of my life best forgotten. But even now, years later, the forest's eyes linger on me, a presence that refuses to let go. The experience changed me, opened my eyes to the darkness that lurked in corners unseen. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear the tapping on my window, a chilling reminder that the forest remembers, and it watches, always.